I'm head of programs and specialists with MOLA, which is Museum of London Archaeology. As Jean mentioned, this is actually a sort of a follow-up talk. So my colleague Paul Thompson, who was the director of the fieldwork, gave a fantastic talk to your organisation back in 2023, so about a year after the burial was discovered. So I'm going to give some updates on the work that we've been doing in the 4 years since that point, and some of the new discoveries that we found. There isn't anything absolutely earth-shattering, I'm afraid, so far, but it's an insight into the sort of the technical processes that we've been undertaking after the finds are removed from the site, and some of the sort of conclusions and guesses that we had at the time that we've been able to confirm and then explore a little bit more since that time. So that's a bit about what I'm going to talk about today. I'll give a very quick overview of how some of the finds were discovered, an overview of the artifacts which we found within the grave, an insight into the laboratory work, a lot of which is still ongoing, and a summary of what we know or think we know so far about the burial. So just to say up front that there is an image of a human skeleton in this PowerPoint. So just to make sure everyone's aware of that and is comfortable going forward. So as Jean said, this is an amazing burial, and it's one that's really captured a lot of hearts and minds, both sort of locally in Northampton and in fact across the world. So our original press release where we announced the find of the burial, one of our comms officers told me it had reached 124 million people, which is an astonishing number of people for one burial from Northampton. There was about 400 articles. It was in newspapers all over the world. And this picture on the screen, you can see presenter Alice Roberts from Digging for Britain, and we were featured in season 11 of the Digging for Britain programme on BBC Two in January in 2023 as well. So it's a burial that a lot of people are interested. People want to talk about. Everybody wants to know, who was this person and why were they buried in such a spectacular fashion? So a lot of that is the questions that we are trying to answer. So this image on the left, this one here, is just a artist reconstruction that we did at the time of the burial of what we thought that the necklace would look like cleaned up. At that point, it was still covered in dirt. We have now cleaned parts of it, and I'll show you some of those photos later, and they're really, really cool. So I'm very excited about that. Okay, so part one, we're going to have a look at the actual grave itself. So as Jean mentioned at the top, when we originally publicised this, it was called the Harpole Treasure. We've actually now kind of rebranded the way that we're thinking about it to the Harpole Burial, because we want to make sure that it's actually the person at the heart of this that's the important thing we want to talk about, and her life, her experiences, her burial, rather than necessarily the shiny treasure, although the shiny treasure is nice and it is a key part of her identity too. So the burial itself, what is it I'm talking about when I say the Harpole Burial? So back in April 2022, this remarkable burial was found. It dates to the 7th century, middle of the 7th century. It comes from a category of graves called a bed burial. And we found this in Harpole in Northamptonshire, which is on the west side of Northampton, probably fairly well known to most people. And it was found completely by accident, like a lot of the best archaeological discoveries. What we were actually looking for was a Iron Age Roman field system and small settlement. We were there investigating that site on behalf of Vistry Group, who are a housing builder. And we were contracted by RPS Consulting, who are now Tetra Tech, and they hired us to go onto that site and investigate those Iron Age Roman features. So here's a little map of that site location. That sort of squiggly outline shows where the housing development is, which is what we were brought in to investigate the land before that development happened. And these two areas here, labelled E and D, these are the actual areas of archaeological mitigation where we were doing the main part of our excavation works to look for this Iron Age Roman site. So no Iron Age activity was, no Anglo-Saxon activity was expected on site at all. It was all fully thought to be Iron Age and Roman on the basis of the preliminary works that we'd done with geophysical surveying and trenching and that sort of things. And in classic time team style, the amazing burial was found on the penultimate day of an 8-week excavation program. So it's always when you least expect it that you get something like this. So here's a little image of the actual site itself. So you can see these sort of grey shapes here. This is an overview of the ditches, the Iron Age ditched enclosures that we have here. There's some roundhouses down here at the bottom, small structures. It's a very typical type of Iron Age Roman farmstead for this part of the world and the country. So you can see, hopefully you can see on your screens at the top, there's these two little purple blobs here, one labeled B3 and one labeled B4. B obviously stands for burial. So firstly, you'll notice there's two burials there, and so far I've only talked about one. So there are actually two graves as part of this discovery, only one of which had any burial material with it. The other one was completely unfurnished, which is really interesting in its own right, and I'll talk a bit about why that's so interesting further down the line. So the team on site turned up to excavate these features from the surface level. They looked like standard Iron Age storage pits with a sort of a dark organic fill. They half-sectioned those pits, which meant that they were excavating them with half of the materials being removed so they could see the layers. And I happened to be in the office at this time because I tend to oversee post-excavation work. So I just had a phone call, sort of, it was about 4:45 in the evening, that just sort of said, I think we've just found something that might be quite exciting. You might need to come and have a look at this, which was, it's a scary phone call to get, but it was a really exciting moment. And they sent me the photo that you can see here on the left, where you can see the material starting to come out of the ground, which was pretty much immediately obvious that something amazing was happening here. And this was not at all what we were expecting to find. It blew everyone's minds, essentially, to find something like this. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity for the team on site, for all of us at MOLA. It's just extraordinary. So what you're looking at here on the left, you can see the sort of dark stuff around the outside. This is organic material. So it's remains of bits of wood, leather, things like that. And then you can see in the middle this sort of cluster of gold objects. This is the remains of the necklace itself. You can see some of the bigger pendants there starting to appear, some of these coin-like pendants that were all just laying on the surface. So what we have to do at that point, it's immediately obvious to us that this is treasure. Treasure is a protected type of find. It's a legal definition of a type of find, and there's a very strict process that has to be undertaken to protect material like that, which we sort of dived straight into that process immediately to make sure that those finds were recovered safely, were held securely, and were transported to the location they needed to be transported to be explored and reported on properly. And this involved bringing down our conservation team, who operate in London. Their offices are in London and their laboratories. So they came down immediately on the train and helped us investigate this burial. So the image on the right here, this is after we've actually dug most of the grave out. And we did that by block lifting the entire contents of the grave in 7 large soil blocks. And we lifted them intact and we took them back up to London for what we call micro excavation. So that's done in a laboratory environment where you control the light and the moisture and the humidity and things like that to make sure that you're removing as much of the material as possible and studying it with the most care that you possibly can. You can see this sort of dark object down here at the bottom of the grave. That's one of the 2 ceramic vessels that was found. There's a little picture of it. They were probably complete when they went into the grave. They're obviously broken now, but we will be able to reconstruct them. And that's another task that we're going to do further down the line. So here's a graphic of the grave itself. And you can see this here was built from a 3D model, the image on the left. These little sort of grey marker points here, these are markers for the camera so that we can rebuild that as a model. That gives us the location of it. In the centre, you can see the necklace, which is this sort of cluster of little, I hope you can see my cursor, I'm waving it around on the screen, but there's a little cluster of objects there, which is the necklace. Down here at what we think is the foot end, you've got those 2 ceramic vessels that I mentioned, and all this sort of dark organic material, which is what's left of things decaying inside the grave environment. And then just around the outside, it's quite difficult to see on this image, but you've got blocks of iron fitted around the edge of that that grave. And then this is just a graphic to kind of show what that actually looks like in a flat image of what those grave things are. So you'll notice that so far, although I said there was going to be pictures of a skeleton, there isn't any obvious skeletal material from this grave. And that's because of the nature of the soil on this site. The only thing that survived of the burial itself, the skeleton itself, was the teeth. So we have teeth crowns. From both of those two graves that I mentioned, we've got all these amazing artifacts, but mostly all we've got left of the body is teeth. So that obviously we've lost a lot of what we might be able to tell about this person, because you can gain a huge amount of information from a person's skeleton, but we can also do things with the teeth that will let us gain some of that information that we've otherwise lost. So it's still a really useful resource for us, as well as being kind of the last surviving, as it were, part of this individual. So I mentioned at the top that we were now calling this the Harpole Bed Burial rather than the Harpole Treasure. There's nothing particularly obviously bed-like about this, but let's dive into that a little bit more. So I mentioned those iron patches that we could see around the edge of the outside of the grave. This is a close-up picture of the grave where you can see where those are sort of marked with these white circles of what those things were. When we actually remove those and clean them up, they look a little bit more like this, which is looks a bit like a key, but actually it's an iron fitting from the inside of a wooden bed frame. And just to give you an example of what those look like in other contexts, these are some from other graves. On the bottom left-hand side here is from the Lapwing Hill, Bed Burial, which is in Derbyshire. And you can see it's got those very, very similar key shape pieces of iron. And also you can see on the right-hand side is an image of the Trumpington Bed Burial, where they had a much better preservation of the human skeleton. This is from a young woman was buried in this grave, who also with absolutely amazing grave goods, also with the evidence of those iron fittings. So how we think those iron fittings function is that it's a wooden framed bed with those iron loops around the outside, and then with a rope strung across the center that holds up a mattress. And that's how the bed was formed. And that's instances that we can see these in other bed burials where they've been constructed in a very similar way, both in England and in Europe. We've got that same kind of structure. So the Trumpington Bed Burial also has some wonderful grave goods like this garnet gold cross, which when I get onto some of the other things from Harpole, you'll see is a very, very similar type of artifact group. So in terms of bed burials, you can see there's 14 listed on this screen. We actually think there's about 17. Some of them haven't quite made it onto this graphic yet. They're sort of broadly spread around the country, but they're basically in two loose clusters. So there's 5 in Wiltshire and Dorset, 10 in Cambridgeshire and Suffolk, and then a couple of strange outliers. One here, number 2, which is in Derbyshire, and another one up here, number 1 in Yorkshire, and Harpole, which also is a very strange outlier right in the in between where these other 2 clusters of bed burials are. There are more on the continent, but these are the English ones. So all but one of these burials so far has been identified as female. The only one that's been identified as the burial of a man is the Lapwing Hill one, this outlier here at number 2. All of the others have been identified as the graves of women. So although we don't actually know in the instance of Harpole, we are working on the assumption at the moment that this is the grave of a woman. That's something that we're hoping to be able to test with the teeth that we've got to actually work out whether or not that assumption is correct, because that assumption tends to come from things like the grave goods, the fact there's a necklace, but it's not known for certain. Bed burials in England tend to be dated between AD 630 and AD 680, and we think this Harpole one falls basically right in the middle of that time period. All of these bed burials have high status jewellery or grave goods, and usually these have some kind of religious symbolism about them, crosses or other symbols that give a Christian message. Usually those bed burials fall within a larger cemetery. They're within a bigger burial ground, and certain particular individuals are distinguished with particularly extravagant graves. And usually the beds are found beneath a mound of some kind, a barrow mound. We don't necessarily have any evidence of a barrow mound at Harpole. There's nothing particularly to suggest there was one. We can't say that definitely wasn't. There could have been, but there's nothing really that supports that at this stage. But we do think there was probably a marker post of some kind. There's a post hole at the end of the grave that makes us think there may have been some kind of marker to indicate where this burial was positioned. So here's just a little image of a lovely mannequin reconstruction of a bed burial. This is from the Street House bed burial in Yorkshire, which is the one that was right up at the top of that map in the previous image. And she we also a burial of a woman, and you can see from this image the reconstruction of the gold and garnet necklace that she's wearing, which is has a shell motif on, which also has Christian symbolism, particularly to do with sort of pilgrimage. Great. So well, let's dive a little bit more detail into our particular example. Now we've recovered all of our grave contents back to the lab. The work that we've been doing over the last 4 years has been to really unpick that grave, because when we got the soil blocks back, what we discovered was that we had a very high compressed set of minerals and materials within the soil. So there's leather, there's hide, there's something that looks like skin, there's organic material, there's fibers, there's cloth, there's probably other bits of human bone in there too. And so what we've been doing is really carefully trying to unpick those soil blocks to work out what the structure of the grave was when the individual was laid in there, and whether or not we can tell anything else about the way that they were buried from that environment. So these two pictures show one of our conservators, Reva, who is doing that job of very carefully unpicking the contents of those graves. So yeah, very time-consuming work. So these are some microscope images of the things that we found. So we have these fibers. Some of them are unwoven and some of them are woven. This one on the right, maybe you can see has a sort of a herringbone pattern, which suggests a kind of a woven cloth, possibly something the person was buried in, possibly part of the bed furnishings. We know that we've got feathers. You can hopefully just about make out that that's a feather in the bottom left-hand side image. So we think that there was possibly a feather pillow or a feather something in there to support the body. This image on the bottom right-hand side, this is a close-up of one of the necklace pendants. And that little orange blob in the middle there is actually the remains of the thread. So this is how we know that it was threaded onto something, either onto a single threaded on necklace or stitched onto clothing or something like that. But we can actually see that that thread is also still extant. So just to give you a sense of how complicated a job this is and to justify why it's taken so long, this is a working image that one of our conservators took. I'm not expecting you to read all of this. It's probably absolutely tiny on your screens, but this is the job that they've been doing to try and unpick the complexity of what's in these soil blocks. They divide the whole block into zones, and then they label the materials that they can see coming out of those zones. So the key things to notice about this image is on the left-hand side, there's sort of a straight line running down the left-hand edge of your screen. And what that is wood. It's a sort of a wooden pole laying down the left-hand side. I'll come on to what that might be in a moment. And you can also see the sort of a greenish cast to this whole image. There's this curving shape here around the left-hand side. If anyone that's got really good eyes can see that's labeled rim. So what we think we have here, these are the last surviving pieces of a copper alloy dish, a bronze dish that was laid on top of the burial. We think it was probably about 33 centimeters in diameter, although it has been crushed, so it's a bit hard to say for certain, and it may have had handles on it. That's about all that's left of that, so there won't be an object that we can remove and put on display. It's just fragments left of that particular object. But we didn't know that before we took the soil block out. So that's really fascinating to see that that's what remains of that object. Now, there are parallels for this. This image here, this is a copper dish that came from the Windfarthing burial, which was a burial discovered in 2014, actually by a metal detectorist, who then alerted archaeologists to come in and excavate the grave. That was also a burial of a Saxon woman from the latter half of the 7th century. It didn't have a bed, but there were many other similarities with the Harpole burial. It also had this lovely gold and garnet pendant you can see on the screen, and a cross pendant as well. This image actually was before that was cleaned up. It's on display in the Norwich Castle Museum now, and it's absolutely gorgeous. So if you get a chance to see it, go and see it. It's magnificent and very, very similar to our burial. So other things we had from the grave, I mentioned those ceramic vessels up the top of the talk. We've put those through the X-ray machine to see if there was anything inside those ceramic vessels. Sometimes you get artifacts buried inside them. We can see that there isn't in this case, but what there is inside them is a sort of a crystalline material. So there may have been something inside those vessels when they were put into the grave, possibly to do with the something that was used in the funeral, maybe some other kind of offering. So one of the jobs we still have to do is to test that material and see what it actually is. We can also tell from looking at these pots under a microscope that the interior surface of the pots has been slightly attritional wear inside it, and what that means is that the pots were used before they were put into the grave. So they weren't made especially to be buried. They were used for something different before they came to be in this environment. We do know from other burials with pots like this that the pots were often used for fermentations, things that produced fermentation, so either dairying or beer brewing or something like that. So that's a possibility here as well. We're hoping to find that out. Our original thinking with these pots was that they were Frankish, that they came from northern France. We actually now don't think that's the case. We think they were made in the UK, maybe in Leicestershire or East Anglia, based on the fabric of those pots. So that's quite interesting too. It's a sort of a inspiration, Frankish inspiration, but locally made. So while we're investigating these soil blocks, we came across this. Now, this probably just looks like a load of mud on your screen. It's one of those soil blocks that's been very heavily compressed, but there are hints of something in here. You can see these sort of curving shapes. There's some sort of dark thing there in the middle. So we put this through the X-ray machine, and this is what we found. I love doing that because it's a big reveal. It's very lovely. So this is a cross-like object. It's about 30 centimeters long. It's lying face down in the grave, so face down on top of the person's sort of chest area. It's an incredibly complicated object. It's made of wood. It's got silver foil on it. It's got 9 gold and garnet settings around the outside. On the ends of the arms, just you can see the southern end of it, there's this large equal-armed cross with sort of rounded edges. And there's this other big cross in the center of it. It's also decorated with little anthropomorphic mounts, so little mounts that look like human faces that are made of silver. They've got blue glass eyes. They're absolutely amazing. They're one of my favorite things about this burial. This combination of things is completely unique. There really isn't anything else to compare to this object. Parts of it are similar, those equal-armed crosses, the faces, but put together like that, it really is something quite extraordinary. This could be all sorts of things. We've heard suggestions of a Bible cover, of suggestions of it's part of a headboard above the bed that's collapsed inwards when the bed has started to decay. Probably the most likely suggestion at the moment is that this is a processional cross. So it's a cross that would have been used in a religious ceremony by a religious figure, and it may go with that wooden pole that I mentioned that was in the grave. So the cross goes on the top of the pole and you use it in a religious ceremony. The only sort of similar thing to that is there was a processional cross in the Staffordshire hoard, although it was sort of scrunched up before it was buried as part of that hoard. So it's a bit hard to reconstruct it. This is just an image of the soil block and the X-ray side by side, and you can see we've cleaned up that garnet, so it looks really nice for the press photos, and you can just about see the other bits of the cross coming off that central part there. So part of the job we've still got to do is to unpick this, clean it up, see what remains of it and whether or not it can be stabilized for something like museum display going forward. We're not sure yet how the wood is going to survive that process. We're being incredibly cautious to make sure we don't do any further damage to this object while we're investigating it. Oh, and this is, I mentioned that little face decoration with the blue eyes. This is a close-up of it. We could see this in the soil when we were excavating. So this is actually a photo taken on site with somebody's camera. And this is it, the little face when we got it into the lab. So this thing is tiny. It's about the size of an acorn. It's really, really small, but it's absolutely lovely. It's got this wonderful little bowl haircut. And I think quite a sort of cheery expression. It's quite a nice little thing. So now we're going to move on to talking about the necklace, which is the bit that everybody on this call has probably seen images of in the paper or online, because this is where the really shiny stuff starts. So the necklace that we found in the grave, this is an image that we've put together of some of the cleaned pendants. Some of them you can see here still aren't cleaned, but that's because we're taking this process really slowly to make sure we don't lose any data. So this necklace is made up of 8 gold coin pendants, 9 oval pendants, which are made of garnet or glass, and they're put in gold settings. There's 12 beads made of coiled gold wire, and a central cross pendant with cloisonné garnet decoration, which is this large one that appears here at the bottom. So I'm going to start by talking about perhaps the least most exciting of all these, which are the spacer beads. These are the these sort of, we call them biconical beads made of wound wire. So these are fairly commonly found in these kind of necklaces. They're usually made of silver or copper alloy, not gold. All of these ones are gold. There's about 100 other examples of these, we think, and they've appeared in about 26 other burials that have these kind of necklaces in, and they're sometimes just found in isolation as well. We sieved all of the soil that we lifted from this grave. We sieved in huge detail through absolutely tiny sieves. We didn't find enough of these gold spacers to complete the necklace. You can see on the top left-hand side, there's about 6 or 7 of them missing. We don't know if they were just never there. We're pretty confident we would have found them if they were in the grave. So maybe the necklace didn't have them strung all the way around. We're not absolutely sure about that. But we do think that they were positioned in this way to slightly separate the other parts of the necklace, which is why we call them spacer beads. There's about 3 different types of them as well, apparent, which is really interesting. They're not all the same. So here's a nicer picture of some of those pendants closer up. So you can see these different sizes of the spacer beads I was just talking about, as well as some of the other amazing pendants in this necklace. So I'll now talk about those in a bit more detail. So we've got the coin pendants. Just to say, some of these photographs have been taken by the conservators during process, so they're never really intended to be sort of publication quality. So if the lighting is a bit off, they were just working shots for now, but just so I've got something to sort of talk about. So these coins that we've got as part of the necklace, we think they're probably pseudo coins. That is, they were never actually used as currency. One of the reasons for that is that they're actually copies, although they look like Roman coins, 4th century coins to be exact, of the Emperor Theodosius I. They're actually imitations. And we think they're quite late imitations, probably made during the late 6th or 7th century, just because of the quality is quite good. They're not very worn, although usually later imitations, the actual quality of the casting tends to be a bit dodgy on these. They're really quite precise. But we know that they're cast imitations because actually on the reverse, the image on the right-hand side, the writing's backwards. So they've just taken an impression and then cast it, which is a bit of a giveaway. So you can see from these 2 images, this is the front and the back of the same coin. The obverse here on the left-hand side, they've positioned the hanging loop so that the emperor's head is upside down. Because of that reason, we think that they probably intended it to be hung with what we would consider the back, the reverse facing outwards, which has got an image of 2 emperors standing side by side with this sort of winged thing above their heads, which is interpreted as victory, the winged victory flying over these 2 emperors. We're not sure why they chose that as the symbol to show. Possibly it looks a bit saint-like. So perhaps there was a sort of, again, a Christian imagery to it, but we're really just making sort of guesses at this stage, educated guesses, but guesses anyway. Coins used as jewelry, that mainly happens in Kent and East Anglia at this point in time. So it's fairly significant that we're finding these in somewhere like Northamptonshire, because that's not particularly common. We're going to try and date these more precisely by seeing how much gold content there actually is in these, because during the 7th century, the amount of gold in coin necklaces tended to decline, and you get more and more silver in currency in general. So that should give us an indication of how old or new these were when they were used. Right, so we've also got the glass pendants. These are also, I say these are my favorites pretty much every slide. I really like the glass pendants. I've just put this image up at the minute. This is what they look like before we cleaned them. I just want to show off again what an amazing job our conservation team did. And this is what they look like after we clean them. So these glass pendants are made of a technique called reticella. This is where thin rods of glass of different colors are partially melted and twisted together to create these really elaborate patterns. I think they look like textile a little bit. They look like sort of woven cloth. We've got 5 glass pendants altogether. One of them is quite plain, just a plain sort of brown red color, and it might be older than the others. We have 4 with this very, very elaborate Reticelli pattern. We think all 4, because they're quite similar to each other, we think they were all made at the same time, probably by the same glass worker. And we also think they were probably made for this necklace, which when I come on to talk about the garnets, you'll see why that's unusual that they were specifically made for just before this burial was interred. And we say that just because during the Saxon period, glass isn't particularly well made. It's not very robust as a mineral. It tends to break down a lot, just because of what they were mixing into glass when they were making it. So because of the fact that this is in quite good condition, we think it probably wasn't around very long before it was buried in the ground. In terms of comparisons, there's less than a handful of comparisons for these. These are certainly the first from the Midlands that have ever been found of necklaces of these kind. And again, they date from that same middle of the 7th century time period that we're looking at. So the other thing I just wanted to show, this one on the right here of these 2 pendants, it looks a fairly dull color in this image with the light on it, but I'll just bring this up to show you what it looks like when I put the light behind it. It's got this absolutely wonderful blue glass. It's very, very vibrant when you actually put a light behind it. So I love it. I think it's great. Okay, so garnets. I mentioned the garnets. So recent studies have identified over about 100 garnet set pendants of the Saxon period used as necklaces. These are some of the largest and finest garnets that have been found. What's really interesting to me about this necklace is that all of them have been cut in different ways. So you can see just from these examples on the screen, this one in the top left-hand side is completely flat. It's a great big flat garnet with no beveling or anything, whereas the other 2 have got a sort of a table shape with a bevel. They don't always fit well in the mounts. Some of the gold mounts have been sort of squeezed to make the garnets fit inside them. This large flat one on the top left-hand side is slightly chipped around the edge, so we think it's been prized out of its original setting and then mounted in the gold. And you can also see this one in the bottom left-hand side here has actually been repaired. So it's snapped in half at some point, and this gold filigree band has been fitted around it to hold it together. And that gold band is quite worn too. So this is a piece that has been cherished. It really has been. It's been around a long time. It may have been used in other bits of jewelry before it came to be in this necklace. So the sort of story we're seeing here is of a piece of jewelry that has been curated, would be the term I would use. All the pieces in it have been gathered from lots of different places. Perhaps they were heirlooms, perhaps they have been inherited, perhaps they've been used in other ways, and that they've been gathered together to be put into this context, whether that was by the person that was buried with them or by her relatives or friends or community when they were burying her. We don't really know, but I think that makes it way more interesting than if every single piece was brand new. The fact that they've all kind of got their own life story even before they came to be part of this burial is absolutely fascinating. So again, they look quite dull on the screen here, but if you put a light through the garnets, they look more like this, which is, again, just spectacular. So while we're talking about garnets, let's have a look at the big pendant. This is the big cross pendant, which appeared in the center of that necklace. You may have seen images of it before it was cleaned up. This is probably the first time that you will have seen this image of it clean. It's absolutely incredible. Just to say, it's a lot smaller than it looks on the screen. It's about this big. Which just makes the artistry of the way it's been made even more impressive. So it's got this decoration style called cloisonne decoration with a cross motif. We think that's a deliberate piece of Christian iconography. It has this raised border made of these mushroom-shaped garnets. They're incredibly thin. They're only a couple of millimeters thin. And they're all set within these recessed gold shapes, every single one. There's 134 garnets in this necklace piece, and they're all set against textured gold foil so that they glitter slightly. And that's a fairly common technique for garnet objects of this type. So these mushroom shapes and this construction shape, Sutton Hoo is one of the most famous examples of this. You also see it in the Staffordshire hoard and other pendants of this type as well. But obviously, I think this was the best because I would. The other thing to note on this is that it's got these central recessed panels with these gold wire spirals in. And you'll note that 3 of these have got 12 spirals, and the one in the top left has only got 9. I'm not sure why that is. We don't really know. It may have a symbolic reason, or it might just be that they ran out of space to do the design completely, which seems unlikely given how beautifully the rest of it's designed and made. But we're just not sure why it's got fewer in that top panel. The other thing to note about, I do have a slightly more detailed image. There we go. You can see that gold foil there behind the garnets in that one. The other thing to note about this, at the top, you'll see it's got these 3 sort of tube shapes attached to the top. Now, the reason that those are there is that this is actually half of a hinged object. And what you're seeing there is the loop that the hinge bar would fit into. And that's clearer if I show you the back. So on this image, you can see on the left-hand side is the back of the Harpole pendant with that hinge on it. And if you compare that to the back of something like the shoulder clasp from Sutton Hoo, you can see it's a very, very similar type of design. It's got these suspension loops on it for attaching to something else, and it's got this central hinge. And from the Sutton Hoo example in the middle, you can see how that would have actually functioned with a central hinge. So we think the Harpole one, again, this is another example of how it's been reused. Perhaps it was originally part of a very similar object to the Sutton Hoo one. Half of it was lost or broken, and it's been repurposed into a necklace at some point further down the line, perhaps because of that cross imagery that you can see on it. I've also just added onto this slide an image of this sword hilt from the Staffordshire hoard, just again to show the intricacies of some of this Saxon garnet work that you can see again also from the Sutton Hoo example, and how absolutely minute some of those garnets are. They're just incredible. But also on that sword hilt, you can see it's got a glass pommel on the top of that is made of glass. So you're seeing that sort of glass use again to decorate these kind of objects. I've realized I'm running out of time slightly, so I'll sort of speed through the next bit. In terms of comparisons, I've talked about some already through the course of the talk. You can see these equal-armed rounded end cross shapes that are quite common in the necklaces and other sort of pectoral crosses where they appear. The 2 examples on the left-hand side of the screen here are from the Ixworth cross and the Trumpington cross. Both of those came from extraordinary female burials. And you can compare that to the shape of the X-ray at the top of the screen, the black and white image, which is the shape from the end of the big processional cross from our site. You can see it's a very, very similar shape being echoed through these designs. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the Desborough necklace, our own Northamptonshire's own Desborough necklace, which is one of the closest comparisons to the Harpole necklace. And they're only a few miles away. It's about 20 miles between these 2 sites. So just another fantastic thing for the county. The interesting thing about the Desborough necklace, it also is made of garnets. It's also got gold in it. It's also got a central cross, very, very similar to Harpole. It's also got these spacer beads as well, which are very, very similar, but it looks a lot more symmetrical. And we don't know whether actually with the Desborough necklace, whether it would have looked like that or it would have been more asymmetrical in the way that the Harpole example is, because this one, we don't have any images of how it was excavated. It was found in 1876, and some of the pieces may have gone missing with the excavators at the time. So a lot of this one is guesswork, but it's another magnificent piece that just shows how important Northampton was during this time period. And another great example is this galley low necklace at the bottom here, which came from a bed burial from the Peak District, and has also got those fantastic garnets on it. So this is the last slide, and I'd just like to finish on this one because it's a beautiful smorgasbord of all the amazing things that we had from this grave in terms of some of the jewelry. And one of my favorite things to draw my attention to as the last thing is just this bottom right hand image here. This is the back of that central pendant, and you can see that there's little scratches underneath that central suspension loop, and that's where somebody has been attaching this to something, either with a thread or with a metal hook, over and over again, and it's actually left these marks on the back. So I think that gives a really beautiful sort of sense of the people that are behind this burial, the person that was buried there, and the work that went into creating her objects and her funeral in such a magnificent way. So I will stop there and open the floor to any questions that have come in.